What if I told you that you shouldn't exist? That every moment of your life, every thought you've ever had, every person you've ever loved exists only because of a cosmic accident 66 million years ago? Welcome back to the Cosmic Atlas, where we explore the deepest mysteries of our universe, our planet, and the razor-thin thread of contingency that connects us to deep time. I'm your host, and today we're embarking on the most ambitious journey we've ever attempted on this channel. We're going to rewrite 66 million years of history. We're going to explore a world that never was, a timeline where the most famous extinction event in Earth's history simply didn't happen. We're going to walk through a world where dinosaurs never died, where they continued evolving for as long as they already had, where the planet followed a completely different trajectory from the one that led to you sitting here watching this video. This isn't just speculation. This is science. Every step of this journey is grounded in paleontology, evolutionary biology, climate science, and geology. We've consulted the latest research from 2024 and 2025, spoken with experts, and built this alternative history on the bedrock of what we know about how evolution actually works. Before we begin, I need you to do something. If you're ready to spend the next hour exploring 66 million years of history that never happened, if you want to see what Earth would look like today if that asteroid had missed, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the Cosmic Atlas if you haven't already, and most importantly, ring that notification bell. We release these deep dive documentaries every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Tokyo, Mumbai, Sao Paulo? The Cosmic Atlas community spans the entire globe, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's talk about the asteroid, the one that hit, and the one that almost didn't. Imagine a spring morning 66 million years ago. The sun rises over what will one day be called North America, illuminating forests of flowering plants, rivers teeming with life, and herds of triceratops grazing peacefully in clearings. A Tyrannosaurus rex stalks through the undergrowth, its forward-facing eyes scanning for prey. Pterosaurs soar overhead, their shadows flickering across the landscape. None of these creatures know that for 1,000 kilometers above them, traveling at 20 kilometers per second, that's 72, 0 kilometers per hour, a mountain of rock and metal is screaming through the atmosphere toward the shallow seas near what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula. This rock, the Chicxulub impactor, is roughly 10 kilometers in diameter. For scale, that's about the distance from downtown Manhattan to LaGuardia Airport. It weighs approximately 1 trillion tons, and when it strikes the Earth in approximately 4 hours, it will release the energy equivalent of 100 million nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. Let me help you comprehend what happens next. The asteroid punches through the atmosphere in less than 2 seconds. It strikes a shallow sea, penetrating through 800 meters of water, through sedimentary rock, and vaporizing everything in its path. The impact creates a crater 180 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep in a matter of seconds. The bedrock itself behaves like liquid under the unimaginable pressures. Billions of tons of vaporized rock, sulfur from ancient seabeds, and seawater itself are launched into the stratosphere. The ejected material reaches velocities exceeding escape velocities. Some of it literally leaves Earth's gravity well and enters space, but most of it arcs across the sky and comes raining back down. Within minutes, earthquakes measuring magnitude 10 or higher ripple across the planet. The impact triggers immediate devastation across North America. Within an hour, wildfires ignited by the thermal pulse, essentially a brief moment of broiler-like heat. From the re-entering debris sweep across continents thousands of kilometers from the impact site. The tsunamis are beyond comprehension. Computer models published in 2024 suggest waves up to 1,500 meters high in the immediate impact zone, with destructive tsunamis reaching every coastline on Earth within 48 hours. But the real killer is what comes next, the darkness. The dust and sulfur aerosols in the stratosphere create a global shroud that blocks out the sun. For months, possibly as long as 2 years according to 2023 research from the Potsdam Institute, global temperatures plummet by 15 to 30 degrees Celsius. Photosynthesis stops. Plants die. Herbivores starve. Predators die. The food chain collapses from the bottom up. Within 1,000 years of geological instant, 75% of all species on Earth are extinct, including every dinosaur larger than a modern chicken. This isn't speculation. We know this happened. In 1980, physicist Luis Alvarez and his geologist son Walter Alvarez published one of the most revolutionary papers in scientific history. They had been studying a thin layer of clay at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, the geological moment exactly 66 million years ago, when dinosaurs disappear from the fossil record. In that clay layer, at sites around the world, they found something that shouldn't be there. Iridium. Lots of it. Up to 30 times the normal concentration. Iridium is extremely rare on Earth's surface. Most of it sank into our planet's core when Earth was still molten for 0.5 billion years ago. But it's common in asteroids. The Alvarez team proposed something radical. A massive asteroid strike at exactly the moment. The dinosaurs vanished. The scientific community was skeptical. Many preferred volcanic explanations. The Deccan Traps in India had been erupting for millions of years, pouring out enough lava to cover half of modern India in basalt up to 2 kilometers thick. Surely that was enough to explain mass extinction? But the evidence kept accumulating. In 1978, a geophysicist named Glenn Penfield had noticed something odd while surveying for oil companies in the Yucatan, a vast, circular structure visible only in gravity and magnetic anomaly maps, buried beneath 600 meters of sediment. By 1991, the connection was made. Samples from Mexican oil wells contained shocked quartz and tektites minerals that form only under the extreme pressures of asteroid impacts. The crater was real. It was exactly the right age, 66.0 for 3 million years old, plus or minus 11,000 years, and it was exactly the right size to have caused a global extinction. The case was closed. The asteroid killed the dinosaurs. But here's the thing about asteroid impacts. They are not inevitable. The Chicxulub impactor's trajectory was determined by billions of years of gravitational interactions, the pull of Jupiter, the nudge of passing asteroids, the precise angle of its orbit around the Sun. A 2017 study published in Scientific Reports calculated that if the asteroid had arrived just 30 minutes earlier or later, it would have struck deep ocean instead of shallow coastal waters. Deep ocean impact means less vaporized sulfur. Less sulfur means less atmospheric cooling. Regional catastrophe instead of global extinction. The dinosaurs would have survived, not because they were superior, not because they were destined to survive, but because the particular event that killed them would not have occurred. Our story begins in that alternative moment. The asteroid screams past Earth's orbital path, missing our planet by mere hundreds of thousands of kilometers cosmically speaking, a hair's breadth. It continues on into the outer solar system, eventually to be perturbed by Jupiter and flung into interstellar space. On Earth, the morning of 66 million years ago continues like any other morning. The Tyrannosaurus rex makes its kill. The Triceratops herds migrate. The pterosaurs soar. And the clock starts ticking on another 66 million years of evolutionary history. But to understand where that alternative history would have gone, we first need to understand the world the dinosaurs would have inherited. We need to see the late Cretaceous not as a dying age, but as a world at its peak. Forget everything you think you know about the age of dinosaurs. Forget the images from outdated documentaries showing a world in decline, lumbering monsters awaiting their inevitable doom. The real late Cretaceous Earth, 66 million years ago, was a world of extraordinary abundance, diversity, and evolutionary success. Our best window into this world comes from a geological formation called Hell Creek, stretching across Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. These rocks preserve the last 2 to 3 million years of the Cretaceous period in exquisite detail. When paleontologists dig in Hell Creek, they don't just find isolated bones, they find an entire ecosystem frozen in stone. And what they've found, especially in the last 5 years, has revolutionized our understanding of dinosaur diversity. A 2023 study published in Nature analyzed fossil distribution in Hell Creek. and concluded that dinosaur diversity was not declining before the impact, it was stable, or possibly even increasing. The old narrative that dinosaurs were evolutionary dead ends stumbling toward inevitable extinction, completely false. Let me paint you a picture of this world. The geography would be recognizable but alien. Sea levels stand approximately 170 meters higher than today because there are no polar ice caps. None. 0. The planet is warm from pole to pole. North America is split into by the Western Interior Seaway, a warm, shallow ocean stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. Crocodilians, relatives of modern crocodiles, live above the Arctic Circle. Forests grow in Antarctica. The atmosphere is different. Carbon dioxide levels are approximately 4 to 6 times higher than pre-industrial levels, creating a powerful greenhouse effect. Oxygen levels are slightly elevated at around 21 to 23% compared to today's 21%, which may have supported the high metabolic rates of large active animals. The world is dominated by flowering plants, angiosperms, that had begun their conquest of terrestrial ecosystems in the Middle Cretaceous, and were now at peak diversity. These weren't the flowers you'd recognize from a modern garden. These were magnolias, ancient relatives of water lilies, early palms, and countless species that have no modern descendants. They shared the landscape with conifers, ferns, and cycads, remnants of older botanical dynasties. And everywhere, in almost every terrestrial niche you could imagine, there were dinosaurs. The latest census from Hell Creek, compiled from decades of fossil collection and published in Paleontology Journal in 2024, documents at least 81 dinosaur species in this single ecosystem during the last million years of the Cretaceous. 81 species in one region, at one moment in geological time. For comparison, the Serengeti ecosystem in Africa today, often called the world's greatest wildlife spectacle, contains about 70 species of large mammals. Hell Creek was more diverse. Let's meet the rulers of this world. Tyrannosaurus rex. The name means tyrant lizard king, and it's not hyperbole. 12 meters long from snout to tail tip. 5 to 9 metric tons depending on the individual. Recent 2022 studies suggest a wider range of body sizes than previously thought, possibly representing sexual dimorphism or individual variation. 4 meters tall at the hip, capable of biting with forces exceeding 50,000 newtons, that's enough to crush a car. But the most remarkable feature of T. rex wasn't its size or bite force, it was its senses. A 2021 study by Kent Stevens and his team at the University of Oregon used CT scanning and computer modeling to reconstruct T. rex vision with unprecedented accuracy. What they found was extraordinary. T. rex had the best binocular vision of any terrestrial predator that has ever lived. Its eyes faced forward, set in a narrow skull, providing a 55-degree overlap wider than modern hawks. Its visual acuity was approximately 13 times better than humans. It could spot a potential prey animal from 6 kilometers away. Its ability to judge distance was essential for a predator that needed to time its attacks precisely. Recent discoveries have also confirmed that at least young T. rex individuals were covered in primitive feathers, filamentous structures for insulation. Whether adults retained full feathering or had partially bare skin like elephants remains debated, but the 2020 consensus leans toward at least some feathering throughout life, especially in colder climates. This wasn't a mindless monster. This was a precision hunter with sensory equipment that rivals or exceeds modern apex predators. But T. rex didn't rule unopposed. Its world was dominated by something else, something that paleontologist Jack Horner once called the bison of the Cretaceous. Triceratops. A 2022 analysis of fossil abundance in Hell Creek came to a startling conclusion. Triceratops fossils account for approximately 60% of all large dinosaur remains in the formation. 60%! If that number is even close to accurate, we need to fundamentally reimagine the Cretaceous landscape. Think of the American Great Plains before European contact, when bison herds numbered in the tens of millions. When you could travel for days without seeing anything but grass and grazing animals. Now replace every one of those bison with a 9-meter-long, 8-ton tank with 3 horns and a frill of solid bone protecting its neck. That skull alone, 1/3 of its entire body length, was the largest skull of any land animal that has ever lived. The brow horns could grow over 1 meter long. The frill was solid bone reinforced with blood vessels for thermoregulation. Recent 2023 biomechanical analysis suggests the horns were capable of generating enough force to puncture tea. Rex hide they weren't just for show. Triceratops was the dominant herbivore of late Cretaceous North America, and its ecological importance cannot be overstated. These animals shaped their environment the way elephants shape African savannas today, knocking down trees, trampling vegetation, creating clearings, dispersing seeds in their massive dung piles. Alongside Triceratops lived the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, with their remarkable dental batteries. These weren't simple teeth. They were sophisticated grinding machines containing up to 1,400 individual teeth, stacked in vertical columns, constantly being replaced throughout life. A 2024 study using micro-CT scanning revealed that hadrosaur teeth had complex enamel patterns that made them more efficient at grinding tough plant material than any other dinosaur group. They were the food processors of the Cretaceous, capable of extracting nutrition from vegetation that would have defeated other herbivores. Species like Edmontosaurus could reach 12 meters in length and weigh up to 4 tons. They lived in massive herds. One bone bed in Montana contains the remains of at least 10,000 individuals that died together, possibly during a drought or flood event. Then there were the armored dinosaurs. Ankylosaurus, a living fortress covered in bony plates called osteoderms, with a tail club made of fused vertebrae, and osteoderms that could generate enough force to shatter bone. Recent 2023 finite element analysis showed that an Ankylosaurus tail strike could deliver up to 4,800 joules of energy, equivalent to being hit by a medieval war hammer swung at maximum force. Pachycephalosaur, with its distinctive domed skull, remains controversial. Were those domes for head-butting contests like modern bighorn sheep? Or were they primarily display structures? Recent histological analysis in 2024 suggests the domes show evidence of repeated impact damage, supporting the head-butting hypothesis, but the debate continues. Above this world flew the pterosaurs, not dinosaurs, but close relatives, members of the broader group Ornithodira, and the largest of them was arguably the most extraordinary flying animal that has ever existed, Quetzalcoatlus northropi, named after the Aztec feathered serpent god. Wingspan 10 to 11 meters. Height when standing on all fours 5.5 meters, tall enough to look a giraffe in the eye. Weight approximately 100 to 250 kilograms. Let that sink in. This animal had a wingspan comparable to a small airplane but weighed less than most adult humans. Its bones were hollow, honeycombed with air sacs that extended from its respiratory system, similar to modern birds but taken to an extreme. The walls of some bones were as thin as playing cards, yet they were reinforced internally with struts and cross-bracing that gave them remarkable strength for their weight. How did it fly? That's been debated for decades. A 2021 study published in Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology used 3D computer modeling and concluded that Quetzalcoatlus could launch itself into the air, using all 4 limbs in a pole vaulting motion, generating enough thrust to become airborne despite its size. Once aloft, it was likely a soaring animal, using thermal currents to stay airborne for hours with minimal energy expenditure. What did it eat? Probably everything it could catch. Most paleontologists now think Quetzalcoatlus was a terrestrial stalker, walking on folded wings across floodplains and coastlines, snatching up small dinosaurs, mammals, fish, and carrion with its massive pointed beak. And in the oceans, the last of the great marine reptile dynasties patrolled the depths. Mosasaurs, massive sea lizards related to modern monitor lizards, had become the apex predators of the Mesozoic seas. The largest species, Mosasaurus hoffmanni, reached 17 meters in length and hunted everything from sharks to sea turtles to other marine reptiles. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks and for paddle-like flippers, had been around since the Triassic. By the late Cretaceous, they had diversified into numerous forms, from short-necked pliosaurs that were essentially underwater tea, rexes, to extremely long-necked elasmosaurs that looked like something from a fever dream. This was the world 66 million years ago, not a world in decline. not a world of evolutionary failures waiting to be replaced. This was a world at peak complexity, peak diversity, peak success. The dinosaurs had been refining these ecosystems for 165 million years. They showed absolutely no signs of decline. They were, by every measurable standard, the most successful group of large land animals in Earth's history. And in our alternative timeline, they were about to get another 66 million years to see what else they could become. The question is, what would they have done with that time? In our timeline, the Paleocene epoch, the first geological period after the asteroid impact, was a time of emptiness and opportunity. The great dinosaurs were gone. The skies were empty of pterosaurs. The seas had lost their mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. Ecological niches that had been occupied for 165 million years suddenly stood vacant. Nature abhors a vacuum. The mammals, which had spent the entirety of the Mesozoic era as bit players, small, mostly nocturnal, ecologically marginal, suddenly had their chance. Within 10 million years, they exploded into every available niche. By the Eocene, 56 million years ago, there were mammals in the seas, early whales, mammals in the air, bats, mammals filling every terrestrial niche from tiny insectivores to elephant-sized browsers. It was the greatest adaptive radiation in mammalian history, and it happened because the dinosaurs died. But in our alternative timeline, there is no vacuum to fill. The morning after the asteroid misses, the same tyrannosaurs are hunting, the same triceratops are grazing, the same pterosaurs are soaring. Life continues. Nothing dramatic changes immediately. Evolution doesn't work on timescales of years or centuries, it works on timescales of hundreds of thousands and millions of years. But the stage is set for something remarkable: 66 million years of uninterrupted dinosaur evolution. Let's start tracking the changes, epoch by epoch, following the fossil record forward through time that never happened. The first major change wouldn't be in the dinosaurs themselves, it would be in the plants. The flowering plants, angiosperms, had been spreading throughout the Cretaceous, but in our timeline their dominance was accelerated by the extinction. Many plant lineages died out, creating opportunities for survivors to diversify rapidly. In our alternative timeline, that mass die-off doesn't occur, but the angiosperms still have competitive advantages that would make their eventual dominance almost inevitable. They reproduce faster than conifers and ferns. They evolve more quickly. They form more intimate relationships with pollinators and seed dispersers. By 10 million years into our alternative timeline, 56 million years ago, flowering plants would dominate most ecosystems outside of high mountain ranges and polar regions. And many of these plants would be bearing fruit. Fruit-bearing plants and the animals that eat them engage in an evolutionary dance that ecologists call mutualism. The plant wraps its seeds in nutritious, often sweet flesh. Animals eat the fruit, swallow the seeds, carry them away from the parent plant, and deposit them elsewhere with a convenient pile of fertilizer. Both species benefit. In our timeline, the explosion of fruit-bearing plants in the early Cenozoic helped drive the evolution of fruit-eating mammals, especially primates, the group that would eventually give rise to us. In our alternative timeline, the same opportunity would exist, but the animals best positioned to exploit it wouldn't be mammals. They would be dinosaurs. The Maniraptorans, the group that includes dromaeosaurs like Velociraptor, Oviraptorosaurs, and the ancestors of birds, were already showing adaptations in the Cretaceous that would serve them well in fruit-rich forests. Small body size, grasping hands with free-clawed fingers, forward-facing eyes providing binocular vision, climbing ability. Picture a descendant of this lineage 10 million years into our alternative timeline, about the size of a modern howler monkey, perhaps 50 centimeters long, excluding the tail, covered in a coat of colorful feathers serving both for insulation and display. Hands that have become more dexterous, more capable of manipulation, still retaining the three-clawed structure but now used for grasping branches and fruit rather than prey. Its beak, yes, beak, because many Maniraptorans had already evolved toothless beaks by the late Cretaceous has developed a slight hook at the tip, useful for tearing open tough-skinned fruits. Its brain is somewhat larger than its Cretaceous ancestors, expanded by the demands of three-dimensional navigation in dense canopy. and the cognitive requirements of remembering the locations and ripening times of fruit trees across large territories. This creature lives in the flowering forests of the Paleocene, leaping from branch to branch with a grace that would look remarkably bird-like. Because, of course, it is bird-like. Birds are dinosaurs, and in our alternative timeline, the distinction between bird and non-avian dinosaur might be much blurrier. On the forest floor and in the canopy, sauropods would persist. These long-necked giants had seemingly declined in diversity during the late Cretaceous in most regions, though they remained abundant in South America. Why they declined in North America while remaining diverse in South America is still debated. Possibly competition with hadrosaurs, possibly changing vegetation, possibly just random biogeographic patterns. In our alternative timeline without the extinction, sauropods would have continued filling their niche, reaching vegetation that no other herbivore could access. As long as there were tall forests, there would be sauropods. Some lineages might have evolved shorter necks and more generalized diets. Others might have become even more specialized, developing longer necks or different body proportions for accessing particular food sources. A 2023 study on sauropod neck biomechanics suggested that the theoretical maximum neck length for a terrestrial animal might be significantly longer than any known sauropod. In our alternative timeline, with tens of millions of additional years to evolve, we might have seen sauropods push that boundary even further. But wait, where are the mammals in all of this? Here is where we need to address a critical question that determines the entire trajectory of our alternative history. Why did mammals stay small during the Mesozoic? And more importantly, would they have stayed small if the dinosaurs had survived? The traditional answer is simple. Dinosaurs suppressed mammalian evolution. They occupied all the large-bodied niches, forcing mammals into marginal roles. Remove the dinosaurs and mammals would naturally expand to fill the vacant ecological space. But recent research suggests this explanation is incomplete at best and possibly backward. In 2021, a groundbreaking study from Oxford and Birmingham universities analyzed evolutionary constraints on different mammal groups before and after the KPG extinction. They used sophisticated Bayesian modeling to identify where each lineage was hitting ecological ceiling, where they were trying to evolve into new niches but running into barriers. What they found was surprising. The ancestors of modern placental mammals and marsupials weren't primarily competing with dinosaurs. They were being outcompeted by other mammals. The Mesozoic wasn't just home to the tiny shrew-like creatures we usually imagine. It hosted a remarkable diversity of mammalian lineages, most of which are now completely extinct: multituberculates, gondwanatherians, eutriconodonts, hyramidons. These animals had already claimed many of the small to medium body-size niches. Some were gliders, some were swimmers, some were burrowers. Some had specialized teeth for particular diets. The ancestors of modern mammals weren't being held back by distant dinosaur giants. They were being outcompeted by their own closer relatives, who were better adapted to Mesozoic conditions. In our alternative timeline, both constraints would remain in place. The dinosaurs would continue occupying large-bodied niches. The extinct mammal groups would continue occupying small-bodied niches. The ancestors of modern mammals would remain trapped in the same competitive squeeze they de-experienced for 150 million years. But let's go deeper. Let's ask why dinosaurs were so good at being large in the first place, because the answer reveals something fundamental about the rules our alternative timeline would operate under. Dinosaurs had a respiratory system that mammals simply cannot match. Like modern birds, which are, after all, living dinosaurs, they breathed using a system of unidirectional airflow through rigid lungs, supplemented by air sacs that extended throughout their bodies, even into their bones. When you breathe, air flows into your lungs and then back out the same way. This is tidal breathing. Fresh, oxygen-rich air mixes with stale, carbon dioxide-rich air that's sitting in your lungs from the previous breath. It's inefficient. You only extract about 20 to 25% of the oxygen from each breath. When a dinosaur breathed, air flowed in one direction only, passing over gas exchange surfaces in a continuous stream. Fresh air is always flowing over the respiratory surfaces. Oxygen extraction efficiency reaches 30 to 35% or higher. This is why bar-headed geese can fly over Mount Everest, migrating at altitudes exceeding 9,000 meters where the air is so thin that humans lose consciousness without supplemental oxygen. Their respiratory system extracts oxygen with an efficiency that mammalian lungs simply cannot achieve. This is why sauropods could grow to 50 to 80 metric tons, while the largest land mammals, the proboscideans, elephants, and their relatives, max out at around 20 tons. The respiratory advantage allows for larger body sizes without running into oxygen delivery problems. A 2022 study published in Proceedings of the Royal Society used computational fluid dynamics to model oxygen delivery in large terrestrial animals. Dinosaurs also had hollow, pneumatic bones filled with air sacs connected to the respiratory system. This makes the skeleton significantly lighter for a given strength compared to mammalian solid bones. A 2021 biomechanical analysis estimated that the dinosaur skeletal system is approximately 30 to 40% lighter than an equivalent mammalian skeleton. While maintaining comparable strength, dinosaurs had faster growth rates, reaching adult size in 15 to 20 years even for the largest species, compared to 40 to 60 years for equivalent-sized mammals. This is metabolically expensive, but it means dinosaurs could replace population losses more quickly. And dinosaurs laid eggs. This might seem like a trivial detail, but it's actually crucial. A pregnant sauropod would be a biomechanical impossibility. The sheer size of the developing fetus would make the mother immobile. But egg-laying separates reproduction from the body size constraint. A 50-ton sauropod can lay clutches of dozens of relatively small eggs, each of which develops outside her body. Every aspect of dinosaur biology was optimized for the ecological roles they had been filling for 165 million years. A mammal trying to evolve into a large herbivore in this world would face competitors who could breathe more efficiently, grow faster, reproduce more quickly, and carry less weight per unit of structural strength. It's not that mammals were inferior as a group. They were trying to compete in a game where the rules favored a different body plan. In our alternative timeline, this would never change. The mammals would remain what they had always been: small, nocturnal, ecologically marginal. Successful at what they did, but unable to break into the niches that dinosaurs controlled. The dinosaurs had won their throne not by accident or luck, but by being extraordinarily good at what they did. But even the most successful lineages face tests, and the dinosaurs were about to encounter their first major challenge. The planet was about to get hot, very hot. Around 55.8 million years ago, something extraordinary happened to Earth's climate. Within perhaps 20,000 years, a blink of an eye in geological time, global average temperatures spiked by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. In the Arctic, temperatures may have risen by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. This is the Paleocene thermal maximum, or PETM, and it stands as one of the most dramatic climate shifts in the last 100 million years of Earth's history. What caused it? The source was probably a combination of factors. Intense volcanic activity associated with the opening of the North Atlantic, as Greenland separated from Europe, possibly triggering the destabilization of methane hydrates, frozen methane compounds on the ocean floor. Once released, methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, would have warmed the planet, potentially triggering further releases in a runaway feedback loop. The result was a hothouse world. Palm trees grew in Alaska and northern Canada. Crocodile-like reptiles lived above the Arctic Circle. Subtropical forests extended nearly to the poles. The Arctic Ocean had surface temperatures of 23 to 25 degrees Celsius warmer than most swimming pools. The deep oceans warmed by 4 to 5 degrees, fundamentally altering circulation patterns. Many deep-sea organisms went extinct. On land, many mammal species couldn't cope with the heat. Here's what happened to mammals during the PETM. Based on decades of fossil evidence analyzed most recently in a comprehensive 2024 review in Nature Geoscience, mammals shrank significantly. This phenomenon is called the dwarfing effect, and it's been documented across multiple mammal lineages. In North America, early horses shrank from dog-sized to cat-sized. In Europe, a primate lineage showed a 40% reduction in body mass. Why? because smaller bodies have higher surface area to volume ratios, making it easier to dissipate heat. In a hot environment, being small is a thermoregulatory advantage for endothermic warm-blooded animals that generate their own body heat internally. Many mammal species went extinct entirely, particularly those in tropical and subtropical regions where temperature increases were most severe. Now here's the critical question. How would dinosaurs have fared during the PETM? Potentially much better than mammals for several reasons. First, large dinosaurs were probably Gigantotherms animals whose sheer mass means their body temperature remains relatively stable regardless of external conditions. A multi-ton dinosaur's body temperature takes hours or even days to change significantly. They could absorb heat from the environment during the day and retain it through cooler nights, without needing to generate it metabolically the way mammals do, because they didn't maintain the high constant internal temperatures that mammals require. Around 37 degrees Celsius for most mammals, dinosaurs weren't as vulnerable to overheating. When ambient temperatures approached mammalian body temperature, mammals struggled to dump excess heat. Dinosaurs, with lower metabolic heat production, faced less acute thermal stress. Second, feathers are remarkably versatile thermoregulatory structures. They can be fluffed up to trap warm air in cold conditions, or slicked down and spread to allow heat dissipation in hot conditions. Modern birds use behavioral thermoregulation seeking shade, panting, spreading wings combined with feather adjustment to survive in environments ranging from Antarctic ice to Death Valley heat. A 2023 experimental study on modern birds published in Journal of Experimental Biology showed that even heavily feathered species can tolerate sustained temperatures up to 45 degrees Celsius by adjusting feather position and behavior. Dinosaurs with similar feather flexibility would have had access to the same strategies. Third, dinosaurs had already proven they could handle temperature extremes. We have direct fossil evidence of dinosaurs living year-round in polar regions during the Cretaceous, experiencing months of winter darkness and temperatures regularly below freezing. If they could handle the cold, heat should have been equally manageable. The equatorial regions during the PETM might have become challenging even for dinosaurs. There are limits to what any terrestrial animal can tolerate. But the poles had become paradise, warm, wet, covered in lush forests extending nearly to the Arctic and Antarctic circles. In our alternative timeline, we might have seen mass migrations during the PETM, dinosaur populations moving toward the poles as temperatures rose, expanding into regions that had previously been marginal habitat. The Arctic and Antarctic would have experienced a biodiversity explosion, as species from lower latitudes colonized newly favorable environments, and in the oceans, something remarkable would be happening. In our timeline, the marine reptiles mosasaurs and plesiosaurs went extinct at the KPG boundary. The niches they left empty would eventually be filled by whales, which evolved from terrestrial mammals and returned to the sea, in one of evolution's most dramatic transformations. But in our alternative timeline, the marine reptiles never went extinct. They would have been there, already occupying those niches when the PET reshaped the oceans. Warm oceans are productive oceans, at least in the surface layers. The PETM would have been a boon to marine life in many ways, despite the extinctions in the deep sea. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, already highly successful, would have diversified even further. Some mosasaur lineages might have become more streamlined, faster, better adapted to hunting in the open ocean where fish and squid were abundant. Others might have grown even larger, exploiting the rich marine productivity of the hothouse world. The plesiosaurs, with their bizarre long-necked body plan that had worked for over 135 million years, would have continued their strange evolutionary journey. Some might have become more efficient hunters, their long necks evolving as ambush weapons. Others might have converged on filter-feeding strategies, straining small prey from the water like baleen whales do in our timeline. The pterosaurs, too, would have thrived. Warm, productive seas support large populations of fish, and fish support pterosaurs. Coastal ecosystems during the PETM would have been ideal habitat for pterosaur colonies. Picture sea cliffs covered with nesting pterosaurs, ranging in size from sparrows to small aircraft, filling ecological roles occupied by seabirds in our world. The pattern lasted for about 200,000 years, long enough for evolution to produce countless adaptations to its conditions. Around 55.6 million years ago, the climate began to gradually cool as weathering of rocks drew carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere and sequestered it in carbonate sediments on the ocean floor. By 50 million years ago in our alternative timeline, the dinosaurs would have reached a kind of equilibrium with the post-pattern world, diversified across every continent, dominant in nearly every terrestrial and aerial niche, sharing the oceans with their marine reptile cousins. To an observer at that moment, it might have seemed that this was simply how the world worked, that dinosaurs were as permanent a feature of Earth as the mountains and seas. But the climate doesn't stay constant forever. Even as the dinosaurs were flourishing, the processes that would end the long greenhouse were already underway. The warmth couldn't last forever. Around 30 million years ago, the Earth crossed a threshold that would fundamentally alter its climate. For the next 30 million years right up to the present day, Antarctica, which had been slowly drifting southward for tens of millions of years, finally separated from South America. The Drake Passage opened between them, creating a seaway that connected the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans around the southern continent. This might seem like a minor geographic change, but its effects were profound. A new ocean current formed, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, or ACC. This current flows eastward around Antarctica, driven by the prevailing westerly winds at those latitudes. It's the largest ocean current on Earth in our timeline. It transports about 135 million cubic meters of water per second, roughly 135 times the combined flow of all rivers on Earth. The ACC isolates Antarctica from the warm ocean currents that flow from the tropics. Before it formed, warm water could reach Antarctic shores, keeping the continent relatively mild despite its polar position. After it formed, Antarctica was cut off from that warmth, surrounded by cold water that reinforced its own coldness in a positive feedback loop. Ice sheets began to form on the continent for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. The planetary thermostat had been turned down. The effects rippled outward from the poles. Global average temperatures dropped by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. Over about 400,000 years, geologically rapid, but slow enough that this wasn't a catastrophic event. Sea levels fell by 60 to 70 meters as water became locked up in Antarctic ice. Rainfall patterns shifted. Temperature gradients between equator and poles steepened, driving stronger atmospheric circulation. And the forests, those endless, pole-to-pole forests that had characterized the age of dinosaurs, began to retreat. This was something genuinely new. For 150 million years, since before the first dinosaur walked the Earth, the planet had been a greenhouse world. Warm, wet, covered in vegetation from the Arctic to the Antarctic. Dinosaurs had evolved in this world, diversified in this world, conquered every continent in this world. They had never faced a planet where ice sheets covered significant portions of land, where winters could be genuinely harsh, where forests gave way to something else. The Oligocene cooling was a test unlike any they had experienced before. But here's where we need to challenge a common assumption. We tend to think of dinosaurs as tropical animals, creatures of warm climates that couldn't possibly survive in cold conditions. The comparison to modern reptiles seems to reinforce this. Snakes and lizards don't do well in cold climates. The problem with this assumption is that it's almost certainly wrong. We now have abundant evidence that dinosaurs lived in polar regions during the Mesozoic. The Prince Creek Formation in northern Alaska, dating to about 70 million years ago, has yielded a diverse dinosaur fauna including hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, and tyrannosaurs. These weren't occasional visitors, they were year-round residents, breeding and raising young in conditions that included months of winter darkness and temperatures that regularly dropped below freezing. In Antarctica, the Hansen Formation and Snow Hill Island Formation have produced dinosaur fossils from similar high latitudes. These animals were living in polar conditions, and they were successful. How did they do it? The answer was literally covering their bodies, feathers. We've known for over 2 decades that many dinosaurs were feathered. The evidence has accumulated from fossil sites in China, Canada, and elsewhere. Feathers have been found on tyrannosaurs, on ornithischians, on dinosaurs large and small, from lineages across the family tree. The original function of feathers wasn't flight, it was insulation. They evolved to keep dinosaurs warm, to trap body heat against the skin, to allow these animals to remain active in conditions that would send a naked reptile into torpor. A 2020 study using phylogenetic bracketing inferring traits, based on what we know about closely related species, concluded that feathers, or feather-like structures, were likely ancestral to all dinosaurs, not just theropods. Many lineages may have lost them secondarily, the way elephants lost most of their hair, but the capacity for feathers was probably present throughout the dinosaur family tree. In our alternative timeline, this adaptation would prove crucial as the world cooled. The feathered theropods, already equipped with nature's most versatile insulation, would have been able to expand into colder habitats as forests retreated and temperatures dropped. Picture a pack of medium-sized theropods, their bodies covered in thick plumage that ruffles in frigid wind, hunting across a landscape that would have been unthinkable in the Mesozoic. These creatures would look remarkably bird-like because they essentially were birds that had never given up their terrestrial hunting lifestyle. The larger dinosaurs faced a different challenge. A 15-meter sauropod or a 9-ton ceratopsian couldn't rely on feathers for insulation the way a 2-meter theropod could. The physics don't work at that scale. But gigantothermy cuts both ways. The same thermal inertia that helped large dinosaurs survive the Eocene heat would help them survive moderate cold. Their massive bodies would change temperatures so slowly that short cold snaps wouldn't affect them significantly. They might have migrated seasonally, following the warmth and the food the way many large mammals do today. Recent 2023 analysis of hadrosaur bone histology found growth patterns consistent with seasonal migration across hundreds of kilometers. In a cooling world, such migrations would become even more important, or some lineages might have simply become restricted to equatorial regions, ceding the higher latitudes to their smaller, more adaptable relatives. The ornithischians, ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, ankylosaurs present an interesting question. We don't have definitive evidence for extensive feathering in most of these groups, though some specimens suggest filamentous integument. In our alternative timeline, the selective pressure of cooling climates might have driven the evolution of thicker, more insulating body coverings. Natural selection would favor individuals with better insulation. Over millions of years, this could produce ceratopsians with dense coats of protofeathers, hadrosaurs with shaggy coverings. Picture a ceratopsian of the late Oligocene, 30 million years ago in our alternative timeline, its body covered in a dense coat of filamentous feathers, its massive frill perhaps reduced from the elaborate displays of its Cretaceous ancestors to something more streamlined, more practical against the cold. It would look something like a woolly rhinoceros, but with the unmistakable silhouette of a horned dinosaur. But the most profound change wasn't in the dinosaurs themselves. It was in the world they inhabited. As the climate cooled and dried, the endless forests began to break up. Trees require certain minimum temperatures and rainfall amounts to thrive. As these conditions retreated toward the equator, the forests retreated with them. In their place, something new was appearing: open landscapes, woodlands with gaps between trees, meadows and clearings where sunlight reached the ground. These weren't yet the great grasslands that would later transform the planet. Grass was still a minor component of most ecosystems, but they were the beginning of something. The age of forests was drawing to a close. The age of open spaces was beginning to dawn, and the rules of survival were changing. In a forest, you can hide. You can ambush prey or avoid predators by staying out of sight. Size matters less than stealth. Speed matters less than maneuverability. But in an open landscape, there's nowhere to hide. You survive by being fast enough to escape, or big enough to fight, or vigilant enough to spot danger before it's too late. Herding becomes an advantage because many eyes are better than two. Long-distance running becomes more valuable than short sprints. These are exactly the pressures that would reshape mammal evolution in our timeline, producing horses and antelope, wolves and big cats that came to dominate open ecosystems. In our alternative timeline, the same pressures would act on dinosaurs, and the results would be strikingly similar, not because dinosaurs would become mammals, but because the same ecological problems tend to produce similar solutions. The Oligocene was a transition, a bridge between the warm forests of the Eocene and the grasslands that were coming. The dinosaurs that emerged from it would be different from their Cretaceous ancestors, better adapted to cold, better adapted to open spaces, beginning to develop the specializations that the new world would demand. They had survived their first major test, but the real transformation was still to come. Around 23 million years ago, a humble family of plants would begin a conquest that would reshape every continent. Grass was about to change everything. If you could watch Earth from space over millions of years, speeding up time until continents visibly drift, and mountain ranges rise and erode, one of the most dramatic changes you'd see would be the greening of the interiors. Starting around 23 million years ago, in the early Miocene epoch, a new color would spread across the map, the pale green of grasslands. Within 10 million years, grass would cover roughly 20% of the planet's land surface. By 5 million years ago, that figure would reach 40%. 40% of all land on Earth covered by a single family of plants. To understand why this matters so profoundly for our alternative timeline, we need to understand what makes grass different from almost every other plant on the planet. Most plants grow from their tips from apical meristems, the growing points at the ends of stems and branches. Cut the top off a tree, and you've damaged its primary growth mechanism. Browse a shrub down to stumps, and you've set back its development by months or years. But grass grows from its base, from intercalary meristems located at the bottom of each leaf. You can cut it, burn it, graze it down to stubble, and it simply regrows from below. The growing point is protected at ground level or even underground, invulnerable to most forms of damage. This makes grass almost impossible to kill through herbivory or fire. It's the plant equivalent of a hydra cut off its head, and it grows right back. Grass also produces silica phytoliths, microscopic particles of essentially glass embedded in its tissues. These make grass tough, abrasive, extremely difficult to digest. Any animal that tries to subsist primarily on grass is essentially chewing sandpaper, wearing down its teeth with every bite. In our timeline, this drove the evolution of hypsodonty high-crowned teeth that continue growing throughout an animal's life, compensating for wear. Horses, cattle, elephants, every major grazing mammal evolved some version of this solution. Animals that couldn't evolve appropriate dentition were simply locked out of grassland ecosystems. Why did grasslands spread so dramatically starting in the Miocene? The answer lies in the same cooling and drying that began in the Oligocene, continuing through the Miocene, as rainfall decreased across continental interiors driven by the formation of rain shadows. Behind rising mountain ranges like the Himalayas and the Andes, forests retreated to wetter areas, near coasts and rivers. The open spaces between them couldn't support forests, but they could support something that didn't need as much water: grass. Grass thrives on disturbance, fire, grazing. Drought conditions that would kill most plants just stimulate grass to grow more vigorously. Grasslands aren't just vegetation communities, they're disturbance-adapted ecosystems, colonizing marginal lands that nothing else can hold. In our timeline, the spread of grasslands triggered one of the greatest adaptive radiations in mammalian history. The fossil record preserves this transformation in exquisite detail. Horses evolved from small, dog-sized forest browsers with multiple toes into large, single-toed grazers capable of sustained running. Their teeth became hypsodont, their legs became longer, their bodies became streamlined for speed. Ruminants, the group that includes cattle, deer, and antelope, diversified explosively. Their four-chambered stomachs, housing symbiotic bacteria that break down cellulose, allowed them to extract nutrition from grass that other mammals couldn't digest. Predators evolved to match. The ancestors of wolves and big cats became faster, more social, better adapted to hunting in open terrain where cooperation and endurance mattered more than ambush tactics. The modern African savanna, with its herds of wild beast and zebra, its prides of lions and packs of wild dogs, is the culmination of 20 million years of evolution in grassland ecosystems. In our alternative timeline, the grasslands would have spread just as they did in our history. The climate patterns that created them had nothing to do with what animals were present. They were driven by plate tectonics, mountain building, and atmospheric circulation patterns that operate regardless of surface biology. The difference is that it would have been dinosaurs, not mammals, facing the challenge of adapting to this new world. And the pressures would have been identical: eat grass or starve, run fast or die, see predators coming or become prey. The solutions, driven by the implacable logic of natural selection, would likely have been remarkably similar. Consider the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs that had dominated herbivore niches in late Cretaceous North America and Asia. In the forests, they had been browsers, using their parrot-like beaks to crop vegetation and their shearing teeth to process it. But those teeth weren't designed for grass. The silica would wear them down quickly, leaving the animals unable to feed efficiently. The ceratopsians that survived in a grass-dominated world would have been those that evolved solutions to this problem, and we can predict what those solutions would look like because we've seen them evolve repeatedly in mammalian lineages. One possibility: the evolution of ever-growing teeth, similar to rodent incisors or elephant molars. The developmental pathways for continuous tooth growth exist in dinosaurs. We see hints of it in the dental batteries of hadrosaurs, where teeth were constantly being replaced from below. A ceratopsian lineage that evolved truly hypsodont teeth would be able to graze indefinitely, wearing down its teeth against silica-laden grass and simply growing more to replace them. Picture a descendant of Triceratops, 20 million years evolved from its Cretaceous ancestor. It's still recognizable as a ceratopsian. The basic body plan works too well to abandon. For legs, horns, beaked face. Eventually, exhaustion wins. The target slows. The pack closes in. It's over in seconds. The troodontids represent perhaps the most intriguing possibility. These were the intellectuals of the dinosaur world, small, lightly built theropods with the largest brain-to-body size ratios of any known dinosaurs. We'll explore their potential for intelligence in the next chapter, but for now, note that they would have been formidable grassland predators in their own right, probably hunting smaller prey that the larger predators ignored, perhaps developing more sophisticated social structures than any of their relatives. The Miocene grasslands in our alternative timeline would have been a killing ground, patrolled by predators at every scale. At the top, packs of slimmed-down tyrannosaurs, still the largest land predators on Earth, but fundamentally transformed by 50 million years of adaptation to new conditions. In the middle, packs of dromaeosaurs, running down prey through sheer endurance, coordinating their attacks with a sophistication that would rival any modern predator. At the bottom, troodontids and other small theropods, hunting everything from rodent-sized mammals to insects to each other, their success depending more on brains than brawn. The age of the lone giant was ending. The solitary tyrannosaur killing through overwhelming individual power was giving way to something new: predators that succeeded through cooperation, coordination, perhaps even the beginnings of what we might call strategy. In a world of open plains and vigilant herds, brains were becoming as important as brawn. And that raises a question that paleontologists have debated for decades. Given enough time, another 50 million years, could dinosaurs have evolved true intelligence? In 1982, Canadian paleontologist Dale Russell published what would become one of the most famous and most controversial pieces of speculative paleontology ever created. Russell had been studying Troodon, a small theropod from the late Cretaceous known for having an unusually large brain relative to its body size. The encephalization quotient, a measure of brain size corrected for body mass, was higher in Troodon than in any other known dinosaur. Looking at this trend, Russell asked a simple question: what if the dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct? What might Troodon's descendants have become after another 66 million years of evolution? His answer was the dinosauroid, a hypothetical creature that stood upright on two legs, had three-fingered manipulative hands with opposable digits, and possessed a large, rounded brain case capable of housing human-level intelligence. Russell even commissioned a life-sized sculpture, and the result was strikingly humanoid: forward-facing eyes, vertical posture, reduced tail, body plan that looked more like a grey alien than a dinosaur. The implication was clear: given enough time, dinosaurs might have evolved intelligence comparable to our own. The dinosauroid hypothesis captured public imagination. It appeared in countless documentaries and books. For many people, it represented scientific speculation at its most exciting, imagining what might have been. but it was criticized almost immediately by other scientists, and that criticism has only intensified in the decades since. The problem isn't the idea that dinosaurs might have become more intelligent. That's reasonable speculation. The problem is the assumption that intelligence inevitably leads to a humanoid body plan. Russell's reasoning went something like this: intelligence requires a large brain. A large brain requires an upright posture to balance it on the spine. An upright posture frees the forelimbs from locomotion. Free forelimbs naturally evolve into manipulative hands. Therefore, any intelligent creature will eventually look more or less like a human. It's a seductive argument, but it's almost certainly wrong. Consider the most intelligent non-human animals alive. Today, crows and parrots have demonstrated cognitive abilities that rival great apes. They use tools, solve complex multi-step problems, recognize themselves in mirrors, understand cause and effect, and even appear to plan for the future. A 2020 study published in Science showed that New Caledonian crows can solve 8-step puzzles, requiring them to use tools in specific sequences to obtain food. A level of cognitive sophistication previously thought to require primate-level intelligence. Yet crows and parrots look nothing like humans. They're birds with wings and beaks and bodies shaped by 150 million years of avian evolution. Their intelligence evolved within the constraints of a decidedly non-humanoid body plan, and those constraints didn't prevent them from becoming remarkably smart. Or consider octopuses. These cephalopod mollusks can solve puzzles, use tools, remember individual humans and react to them differently, escape from seemingly impossible enclosures, and appear to possess something like individual personalities. An octopus is about as far from a humanoid body plan as you can get. 8 arms, no skeleton, a distributed nervous system with neurons in each tentacle capable of independent decision-making. Yet they're among the most intelligent invertebrates on Earth, possibly among the most intelligent animals, period. A 2023 study using behavioral experiments concluded that octopuses demonstrate episodic-like memory, the ability to remember specific past events and their context to cognitive capacity. Thought to be limited to humans and a few other species, the lesson is that intelligence is not a destination that evolution is trying to reach. It's a tool like claws or wings or venom that evolves when selective pressures favor it, and it can evolve in bodies of almost any shape. Intelligence is ultimately about information processing, not about having hands or standing upright. So what would intelligent dinosaurs actually have looked like? Probably like dinosaurs. The troodontids of our alternative timeline, after 66 million years of additional evolution, would still be recognizable as theropod dinosaurs. They would retain the basic body plan that had served their ancestors so well: bipedal locomotion, horizontal posture balanced by a long tail, grasping forelimbs, head full of sharp teeth. What would change was inside that head. The Truden brain was already large for a dinosaur. Recent CT scanning studies have revealed that its brain structure was remarkably complex, with enlarged cerebral hemispheres and well-developed optic lobes. If the selective pressures we've discussed continued to favor cognitive ability, if pack hunting demanded better coordination, if grassland life required better spatial memory, if complex social structures required recognizing individuals and remembering relationships, then the troodontid brain might have continued to expand. How far could it go? We can look at what happened with birds for clues. Crows and parrots have brain-to-body ratios comparable to great apes, and they evolved that level of encephalization in roughly the same 66 million years we're reimagining for our alternative timeline. It's not unreasonable to suppose that a lineage starting with Truden's already impressive brain might have reached similar levels. Picture a troodontid of the late Miocene, perhaps 10 million years ago in our alternative timeline, 2 meters long from snout to tail tip, covered in feathers ranging from grey on the back to white on the belly camouflage. For the open grasslands where it hunts, eyes large and forward-facing, providing excellent binocular vision for judging distances, hands retaining 3-clawed fingers, but capable of grasping and manipulating objects with unprecedented precision, perhaps able to hold, and use simple tools like sticks to probe burrows or rocks to crack hard food items, and its brain housed in a skull that bulges noticeably at the back. is the largest of any land animal on Earth in proportion to its body size. This creature is smart. Not human smart, we'll get to why in a moment, but smart in ways that matter for survival. It hunts in packs of 10 to 20 individuals, and the coordination of those hunts is remarkable. Flanking maneuvers, diversionary tactics, even what appears to be deliberate deception, with some individuals feigning injury to lure prey into ambushes. It uses simple tools, sticks to probe burrows for hidden prey, rocks to crack open hard-shelled food items, perhaps even using thorns or sharp objects as weapons, gripped in its claws. It has a complex vocal repertoire, dozens of distinct calls that communicate information about predators, food sources, and social status within the pack hierarchy. Young troodontids learn from their elders, watching and imitating behaviors rather than relying purely on instinct. This cultural transmission means that different populations might develop different hunting techniques or tool-using traditions. In many ways, this creature would occupy an ecological niche similar to modern wolves or early hominins, a social predator whose success depends more on brains than brawn, more on cooperation than individual strength. It would be formidable, adaptable, capable of thriving in environments across the globe. But it would not have built cities. It would not have developed writing or mathematics or philosophy. It would not have asked questions about the stars or wondered about its place in the universe. Why not? Because human-level intelligence isn't just about having a big brain. It's about a very specific set of circumstances that, as far as we can tell, occurred exactly once in the history of life on Earth. Human intelligence evolved in primates, a lineage that had already spent tens of millions of years developing complex social structures, manipulative hands adapted for grasping branches, and brains adapted for navigating three-dimensional forest environments. Then our ancestors were forced out of the trees and onto the African savanna, where they faced new selective pressures, the need to find food across large territories, the need to cooperate in groups, the need to communicate complex information about resources, and dangers. Our brains expanded dramatically over just 2 to 3 million years, driven by a feedback loop between social complexity and cognitive ability. Individuals who could communicate better, cooperate more effectively, and remember more complex information had more offspring. Their genes spread through the population. The average intelligence increased, which increased the value of social intelligence, which selected for even larger brains. This sequence of events was contingent on countless factors, each one necessary but not sufficient on its own. Primates reached Africa, but they also reached North and South America at various times. None of those lineages evolved. Large brains approaching human levels. Grasslands appeared on every continent, but only in Africa did they produce a species capable of abstract thought and technology. Social hunting evolved independently in wolves, lions, African wild dogs. Hyenas, none of them developed human-level intelligence. Despite millions of years of social complexity, intelligence of some kind might be common in the universe. But intelligence like ours, capable of technology, science, philosophy, asking why, might be vanishingly rare. Our alternative troodontid would be intelligent, perhaps as intelligent as crows or dolphins or chimpanzees. They might use tools, form complex societies, pass knowledge from generation to generation. But the spark that lifted our ancestors from clever ape to questioning human, that spark might never occur in a dinosaur lineage, no matter how many millions of years it had to evolve. And perhaps there's something profound in that. In our alternative timeline, Earth would remain a planet of animals, sophisticated, adapted. Successful animals, but animals nonetheless. Creatures that think, but not creatures that wonder why they think. A world of complexity without consciousness of that complexity. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We've reached the Miocene, roughly 15 million years ago in our alternative timeline. The grasslands have transformed the continents. Dinosaurs have adapted to these new conditions, developing new forms, new behaviors, new levels of cognitive sophistication. But they're about to face their greatest test yet. The ice is coming. Before we follow the dinosaurs into the ice, let's pause for a moment at the peak, the Miocene, roughly 15 to 10 million years ago in our alternative timeline, when dinosaur diversity might have reached its greatest extent. By this point, the continents are in nearly modern positions. Africa has collided with Eurasia, closing the Tethys Sea and creating a continuous landmass from Spain to Mongolia. India has long since crashed into Asia, raising the Himalayas to heights approaching modern levels. The Americas are connected by the Isthmus of Panama, allowing species to move between North and South America. This geography would create distinct faunal provinces regions, with characteristic dinosaur communities that differ from those in other regions, separated by barriers like oceans, mountains, or deserts. In Asia, descendants of the Great Cretaceous dinosaur dynasties would dominate, ceratopsian herds stretching across the steppes of Mongolia and Kazakhstan, sauropods persisting in the forests of Southeast Asia, tyrannosaur packs patrolling from Siberia to northern China. But there would be novelties to new lineages that evolved in isolation during earlier epochs, now spreading across the supercontinent. North America would host a similar assemblage, with exchange between Asia and North America across the Bering Land Bridge. During periods of low sea level, the grasslands of the Great Plains would support enormous herds of ceratopsians, and hadrosaurs numbering in the millions, creating migrations that darkened the horizon. Africa, isolated from Eurasia for much of the early Cenozoic, would have developed its own unique dinosaur fauna. By the Miocene, with the land connection restored, African species would begin spreading north and Eurasian species south, creating a mixed fauna. The savannas of East Africa, already beginning to form as the climate dried, would host the greatest concentration of large dinosaurs on Earth, playing the same ecological role that large mammals fill in our timeline. South America presents the most intriguing case. Isolated from other continents from about 50 million years ago until 3 million years ago, South America would be an evolutionary laboratory, producing forms found nowhere else on Earth. Perhaps sauropods would reach their greatest diversity here, freed from competition with hadrosaurs and ceratopsians that dominated northern continents. Perhaps entirely novel dinosaur lineages would evolve, adapting to the unique conditions of Amazonian rainforests and Andean highlands. When the Panama Land Bridge finally formed, around 3 million years ago, there would be a great faunal interchange, South American forms moving north, northern forms moving south, competing and interbreeding and reshaping both continents' ecosystems. Australia would be stranger still. Separated from Antarctica around 45 million years ago, Australia would have drifted north in splendid isolation, carrying whatever dinosaur fauna happened to be present at the moment of separation. Those dinosaurs would evolve for 45 million years with no contact with other continents, no new arrivals, no exchange of genes or competition from outside lineages. The result would be an Australian dinosaur fauna as unique and bizarre as the marsupial fauna of our timeline. We can't predict exactly what forms would evolve. That would depend on which species happened to be present at separation, but they would certainly be unlike dinosaurs anywhere else. And in the oceans, the marine reptiles would have reached peak diversity. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, evolving uninterrupted for 66 million years beyond their Cretaceous origins, would fill every marine niche from coastal shallows to abyssal depths. The largest forms might rival the blue whale in size 30 meters or more, filter feeding on krill in productive polar waters. Medium-sized forms would hunt fish and squid. Smaller species would patrol coral reefs, which by the Miocene would be dominated by scleractinian corals just as they are today. Some marine reptiles might have converged on dolphin-like body plans, fast, agile, using echolocation to hunt in murky waters or at night. Others might have become specialized for particular prey, fish eaters with elongated jaws, shell crushers with powerful bite forces, even plankton feeders with baleen-like filtering structures. The Miocene world of our alternative timeline would be a planet at peak dinosaur diversity, hundreds of species across every continent, filling every conceivable niche from Arctic tundra to equatorial rainforest, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains accessible to terrestrial life. To an observer standing at this peak 15 million years ago, it would seem that dinosaurs were eternal, that they would continue indefinitely as they had for the previous 115 million years. But change was coming. The same processes that had cooled the Earth during the Oligocene were continuing, accelerating. The ice sheets of Antarctica were growing, locking up more water, further lowering sea levels, further cooling the planet. And in the northern hemisphere, a new threshold was approaching. 2.6 million years ago, in our timeline and in our alternative one, the world would cross that threshold. Ice sheets would begin to form in the northern hemisphere, spreading across Scandinavia and Canada. The Pleistocene, the Ice Age epoch, would begin, and the dinosaurs would face the most extreme test in their entire 130 million year history. 2.58 million years ago, something changed. For tens of millions of years, Antarctica had been the only ice-covered continent, a lonely frozen wasteland at the bottom of the world, while the rest of the planet remained relatively mild. But now, the slow cooling that began in the Oligocene reached a critical point. The northern hemisphere, which had been ice-free even at high latitudes, suddenly began to glaciate. Ice sheets formed in Scandinavia, spreading west and south. In North America, glaciers advanced from the Canadian Arctic, eventually covering most of Canada and reaching as far south as modern Illinois. The Pleistocene had begun the epoch we commonly call the Ice Age, though technically it's still ongoing. We're currently in an interglacial period, a warm phase between glaciations. But the Pleistocene wasn't just cold, it was unstable. These cycles were driven by variations in Earth's orbit around the Sun, changes in eccentricity, axial tilt, and precession, known collectively as Milankovitch cycles. When these orbital parameters aligned in certain ways, northern summers became too cool to melt the previous winter's snow. Ice accumulated year after year, forming glaciers that grew into ice sheets kilometers thick. Then, when the orbital parameters shifted, the ice melted rapidly, in geological terms retreating within a few thousand years and allowing recolonization of previously glaciated lands. Over the course of the Pleistocene, there were more than 20 of these glacial-interglacial cycles, each one a stress test for every species on Earth. In our timeline, this era produced the famous megafauna of the Ice Age, woolly mammoths with their shaggy coats, and curved tusks adapted for sweeping snow aside to reach vegetation, woolly rhinoceroses built like ferry tanks, cave lions larger than any modern lion, dire wolves, short-faced bears, giant ground sloths the size of elephants, Irish elk with antlers spanning 3.5 meters. These animals evolved specifically for glacial conditions, massive bodies to retain heat. Bergmann's rule: within a species, individuals in colder climates tend to be larger. Thick fur or fat layers for insulation. The ability to survive on sparse vegetation during long winters. They were the defining creatures of their age, roaming across the mammoth steppe, a unique ecosystem that no longer exists, a mixture of grasses, herbs, and low shrubs that stretched from Western Europe across Siberia, across Beringer, the land bridge connecting Asia and North America, and into Alaska. In our alternative timeline, there would be no mammoths, no woolly rhinos, no giant ground sloths. Those niches, large, cold-adapted herbivores, would be filled by something else entirely. They would be filled by dinosaurs. The question is, could dinosaurs actually survive the ice ages? This is the greatest test, the challenge that would push them further from their evolutionary comfort zone than anything they defaced before. For 200 million years, dinosaurs had thrived in a greenhouse world. Warm, wet, forested. The grasslands of the Miocene had been a significant change, but temperatures had still been mild. Now they would face winters where temperatures dropped to -40°C. Snow covering the ground for 8 months of the year. Food desperately scarce. Survival requiring either migration across thousands of kilometers, or the ability to endure months of privation. Could they do it? We have reasons to think they could. Remember the Prince Creek Formation in Alaska, where we have unequivocal evidence of dinosaurs living year-round above the Arctic Circle. During the Cretaceous, hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, tyrannosaurs all breeding and raising young in conditions that included months of winter darkness and temperatures regularly below freezing. A comprehensive 2024 study published in Geology analyzed growth patterns in bones from Prince Creek dinosaurs and found evidence that they remained active year-round. They weren't migrating south for the winter or entering torpor. They were simply enduring the cold, and they did it with feathers. Feathers evolved specifically for insulation. They're arguably the most effective insulation mechanism in the natural world pound for pound. Feathers provide better thermal insulation than fur or blubber. Modern birds survive in some of the coldest environments on Earth. Emperor penguins breed in Antarctica, enduring temperatures of -40 Celsius and wind chills exceeding -60 C. Snowy owls and ptarmigan live in Arctic tundra year-round. Hummingbirds, tiny endotherms with high metabolic rates, survive freezing nights in high-altitude mountains by entering torpor, lowering their metabolism overnight and rewarming in the morning. The adaptations required for Pleistocene survival would be significant, but they wouldn't require dinosaurs to become something fundamentally different. They would require them to become more of what they already were. Consider the ceratopsians. By the time the Pleistocene began, they would already have had 60 million years to adapt to cooling climates since the Oligocene. They would already be cold-tolerant specialists. The Pleistocene ceratopsian would be a magnificent creature. Imagine something recognizable as a Triceratops descendant, but transformed by adaptation to extreme conditions. Massive body, perhaps 8 to 9 meters long, bulked up with fat reserves that could sustain it through lean winter months. Its frill, once elaborate display structure, now reduced and thickened for functionality, and covering its entire body from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail. A dense coat of feathery integument, not the elaborate plumage of a tropical bird, but thick, insulating down layers of fine filaments that trap warm air against the skin, overlaid with longer, guard hair-like feathers that shed snow and rain. Picture this creature on the Siberian mammoth steppe during an interglacial period. It moves in a herd of hundreds, their bodies close together for additional warmth. Their breath forms clouds in the frigid air. They're feeding on tough, low-growing vegetation, their ever-growing teeth grinding plant material with the efficiency that no mammal can match. When winter comes, and on the mammoth steppe, winter terminates the year, they will migrate south, following the retreating warmth like caribou following the spring green-up. Thousands of kilometers on foot, an annual journey that shapes their entire life cycle. The calving grounds would be in the far north, where summer's endless daylight produces an explosion of plant growth. The young are born in June, and they must grow quickly. They need to be strong enough to make the migration south before the first heavy snows in September. The hadrosaurs would face similar pressures and develop similar solutions. Their sophisticated feeding apparatus, those dental batteries, would serve them well on a diet of tough Arctic vegetation, but they would have an advantage that ceratopsians lacked: versatility. Hadrosaurs could walk on either 2 legs or 4. In deep snow, where breaking trail is exhausting, the ability to rear up and browse on shrubs and low trees when ground-level vegetation is buried would be invaluable. A Pleistocene hadrosaur might be covered in dense feathering except on the feet, heavily scaled. Broad feet adapted for walking on snow, perhaps with seasonal changes in foot structure, developing more surface area in winter like snowshoe hares. In the worst of winter, they would congregate in valleys that offered some protection from wind, huddling together for warmth the way muskoxen do in our timeline. Their social structure would be critical to survival cooperation, meaning the difference between life and death. And what about the predators? A Pleistocene tyrannosaur, descended from the pack-hunting lineages of the Miocene, would be a creature of nightmares but beautiful in its adaptation. Smaller than Cretaceous ancestors, perhaps only 5 meters long. 3 tons but covered in a thick coat of white and grey feathers that renders it nearly invisible. Against snowy backdrop, it hunts in coordinated packs, taking down prey many times its individual size through teamwork. The hunts would be calculated, energy efficient, no wasted effort in an environment where food is scarce. And the cost of failure is starvation. In the depths of winter, when prey is most scarce, tyrannosaurs might be able to slow their metabolism, entering a torpor-like state similar to hibernation, surviving on stored fat until spring brings new opportunities. The smaller theropods, dromaeosaurs, troodontids, would become even more sophisticated. Their smaller size might actually be an advantage in some contexts, requiring less food to maintain, able to exploit prey items too small for tyrannosaurs to bother with. But not all dinosaurs would adapt to the cold. Some lineages would retreat to the tropics, surviving in equatorial refugia where temperatures remained mild even during glacial maxima. South America, isolated by the temporary flooding of the Panama Isthmus during glacial low stands, might become a repository of ancient forms. Southeast Asia and Central Africa would serve similar roles. The result would be a planet divided into climatic zones more sharply than at any time since the dinosaurs first appeared. In the tropics, something like the old Mesozoic world might persist warm, forested, populated by dinosaurs that would look familiar to a visitor from the Cretaceous. In the temperate and polar regions, something new would have emerged. Dinosaurs as different from T. Rex and Triceratops as mammoths were from their tropical elephant ancestors. The oceans would tell a similar story. Marine reptiles would continue dominating the seas, but cold oceans have different dynamics than warm ones. Some lineages might develop thick layers of blubber for insulation, converging on the body plans of marine mammals. Others might become seasonal migrants, following prey species between tropical and temperate waters. The pterosaurs, having survived every extinction event that killed dinosaurs in our timeline, would persist as well. Some lineages might become cold-adapted, hunting across Ice Age landscapes. Others would retreat to the tropics between glaciations, expanding back into higher latitudes during interglacials. The Ice Ages would be a crucible, testing the dinosaurs more severely than anything in their previous 125 million year history. Some lineages would fail, going extinct as climate pushed them beyond their physiological limits. But others would pass the test, emerging from the glacial cycles hardened and adapted, ready for whatever came next. And what came next in our timeline was us, but in our alternative timeline, that doesn't happen. Let's see what the Pleistocene world becomes without humans. As the ice advances and retreats for the 100th, the 1000th time, stand on a hilltop in our alternative present 2026 in a timeline where the asteroid missed. The geography is familiar. The same mountain ranges carved by the same tectonic forces. The same rivers following the same paths dictated by topography. The same coastlines shaped by the same waves and tides. This is still Earth. The same ball of rock and water, the same atmosphere, the same sun providing energy, the same moon pulling tides. But when you look out across that familiar landscape, everything is different. Let's take a tour, continent by continent, ecosystem by ecosystem. Let's see what 230 million years of uninterrupted dinosaur evolution has produced. We'll start in Africa, the Serengeti and surrounding savannas of East Africa in our timeline, the greatest concentration of large mammals on Earth. The geography that created this ecosystem exists in our alternative timeline too. The same volcanic soils, rich in nutrients. The same seasonal rainfall patterns, a rainy season that greens the plains, followed by months of drought. The same endless grasslands stretching to the horizon, broken by scattered acacia trees. But instead of wildebeest and zebra, you would see herds of ceratopsians. Their horned heads bob as they graze, thousands of animals moving together in the greatest wildlife migration on Earth. Some species are massive elephant-sized, the megaherbivore niche fillers, 8 meters long, 6 tons, moving with surprising grace despite their bulk. Others are smaller, faster, more numerous. They live in larger herds, tens of thousands, relying on vigilance and numbers for protection. Their bodies are covered in sparse, scale-like feathers adapted to tropical heat, with elaborate frills used for display and thermoregulation. During the migration season, the herds move north, following the rains and a green up of grass. The ground trembles under their feet. The dust clouds they raise can be seen from orbit, and hunting them are the predators. Packs of medium-sized theropods, dinosaur descendants, perhaps 5 meters long. Dromaeosaurs working in coordinated groups of 20 or more. They patrol the edges of the herds, looking for weakness. That individual limping slightly, targeted. That juvenile separated from its mother, marked. The old bull past his prime, identified. The hunts are sophisticated, honed by 230 million years of predator-prey evolution. Flanking maneuvers, coordinated strikes. Some individuals driving prey toward others lying in ambush. When a kill is made, the hierarchy determines feeding order. The alpha individuals eat first, then subordinates, then juveniles. It's brutal, efficient, the same social structure seen in wolves and lions in our timeline. The skies above are filled with pterosaurs, Not the giants of the Cretaceous. Those ecological niches are now filled by large flying birds, but smaller species, diverse and abundant. Some are scavengers, circling above kills, descending in squabbling flocks once the predators have gorged themselves. Their beaks tear at carcasses with the same efficiency as vultures in our world. Others are active hunters, diving on small prey with the precision of falcons. Fish-eaters patrol the lakes and rivers. Insectivores hawk for flying prey at dawn and dusk. And birds are there too. Of course, the one dinosaur lineage that survived the extinction in our timeline. Here sharing the sky with their pterosaur cousins. Competition has driven both groups to specialize, partitioning the aerial environment into niches where each has an advantage. Across the Atlantic, South America tells a different story. The Amazon basin, the largest rainforest on Earth in both timelines, would be a realm of shadows and secrets. The canopy rises 40 meters above the forest floor, a world of its own, accessible only to climbers. And here, the sauropods have persisted. Their long necks snake up into the canopy, browsing on leaves that no other animal can reach. These aren't the giants of the Jurassic evolution. In the closed rainforest environment has favored smaller, more maneuverable species. But they're still unmistakably sauropods, the last survivors of a lineage that once dominated the entire world. On the forest floor, small theropods hunt in the leaf litter. These are the descendants of Cretaceous maniraptorans, barely the size of chickens, picking off insects and small vertebrates. They've retained their grasping hands, their sharp eyes, their quick reflexes. And in the rivers, something remarkable, aquatic dinosaurs. Not marine reptiles, but actually terrestrial dinosaurs that have taken to the water. Perhaps descended from hadrosaurs, they use their powerful tails for propulsion, their bodies streamlined for swimming. They feed on aquatic vegetation and fish, filling niches occupied by capybaras and otters in our timeline. Australia presents the strangest fauna of all. Separated from Antarctica 45 million years ago and drifted north in isolation. Australia's dinosaurs evolved with no contact with other continents for millions of years. The specific forms would depend on which species happened to be present at separation, probably a mixture of Gondwanan lineages that were widespread across the southern continents during the Cretaceous. But whatever those founding species were, they would have diversified to fill every available niche. The result would be an Australian dinosaur fauna as unique and bizarre as the marsupial fauna of our timeline. Perhaps there are hopping dinosaurs, convergently evolving bipedal saltation like kangaroos. Perhaps gliding dinosaurs, using feathered membranes to travel between trees. Perhaps burrowing dinosaurs, living underground in complex tunnel systems. We can't predict the specifics without knowing the starting conditions, but we can be certain they would be unlike dinosaurs anywhere else on Earth. In North America and Eurasia, the northern continents that bore the brunt of Pleistocene glaciations, the fauna would be dominated by cold-adapted forms. The grasslands of the Great Plains, the steppes of Central Asia, the tundra of Siberia and Alaska, these would be the realm of the woolly dinosaurs. Massive ceratopsians with thick coats of feathers, migrating thousands of kilometers annually. Hadrosaurs adapted to deep snow and sparse vegetation. Pack-hunting theropods whose white and grey plumage renders them invisible until they strike. These are the direct descendants of the Pleistocene survivors, the lineages that passed through the Ice Age crucible and emerged transformed during the current interglacial which we're in now, and which has lasted about 11,000 years. These cold-adapted forms have expanded north, following the retreating ice. But in 20,000 or 30,000 years, when the next glaciation begins, they'll be pushed south again, and the cycle will continue. And in the oceans would be spectacular. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, 230 million years evolved from their Mesozoic ancestors, would dominate every marine environment from coastal shallows to the abyssal depths. The largest forms would rival the blue whale in size, 30 meters or more, 150 tons. Filter feeding on krill and small fish in the productive polar waters. Their bodies streamlined for efficiency, their flippers powerful enough to propel their enormous mass through the water with grace. These giants would migrate between feeding grounds in the Arctic and Antarctic, traveling thousands of kilometers like the great whales of our world. Their songs, low-frequency calls used for communication across vast distances, would echo through the ocean basins, Smaller marine reptiles would fill other niches. Fast, dolphin-like forms hunting fish in the open ocean. Slow, heavily armored bottom feeders. Specialized predators targeting specific prey. Some hunting seals, yes. There might be semi-aquatic mammals in coastal environments, others taking seabirds, others still hunting each other. Coral reefs would be patrolled by small to medium-sized marine reptiles, filling the ecological roles of sharks and large fish in our world. What you would not see, anywhere on this alternative Earth, is a human being. No cities on the horizon. No roads cutting across the grasslands. No farms, no fences, no domesticated animals. No ships on the oceans or aircraft in the skies. No evidence that any species has ever asked why. The world would be wild in a way our world hasn't been wild for 10,000 years, perhaps in a way our world was never wild. Because even before agriculture, humans were reshaping ecosystems through hunting and fire. This absence would change everything about how the planet works. Without humans to hunt them, the megafauna would be far more abundant than anything in our timeline. The ceratopsian herds of Africa might number in the tens of millions, their combined biomass exceeding anything we've ever documented. Without humans to fragment habitats, ecosystems would be continuous across entire continents, migration routes unbroken, gene flow unrestricted, populations connected. Without humans to drive species extinct through hunting, habitat destruction and climate change, biodiversity would be higher not just because the dinosaurs would be there, but because all the cascading extinctions that humans caused wouldn't have happened. And the planet's chemistry would be different, too. No fossil fuels burned. No carbon dioxide pumped into the atmosphere from industrial processes. No anthropogenic global warming threatening to destabilize climate systems. The atmospheric CO2 concentration would still be around 180 parts per million, the natural pre-industrial level, rather than the 425 ppm it reached in our 2026. The alternative Earth would still be in the grip of the Pleistocene Ice Age cycle, heading toward another glacial maximum in a few tens of thousands of years. Its climate controlled by orbital mechanics, Milankovitch cycles, and volcanic activity, rather than industrial emissions. The dinosaurs would face the coming ice age the way they've faced every previous one, through migration, adaptation, and the slow grind of natural selection. Here's a strange thought to sit with. If you're hearing these words, if you're understanding them, then the asteroid hit. That's the paradox at the heart of this entire thought experiment. The very act of imagining a world where dinosaurs survive requires a mind capable of imagination. And that mind, your mind, exists only because the dinosaurs died. Human intelligence is not some inevitable endpoint of evolution, some destination that life was always heading toward. It's a contingency, an accident, the improbable result of a very specific sequence of events that began with a rock from space striking the Yucatan Peninsula 66 million years ago. If the asteroid had missed, there would be no one to wonder what might have been. Think about the chain of events required for you to exist. The asteroid had to hit, creating the ecological vacuum that allowed mammals to diversify. A primate lineage had to evolve in the early Cenozoic, developing grasping hands and forward-facing eyes for life in the trees. That lineage had to survive the climate fluctuations of the Oligocene and Miocene. Some of those primates had to reach Africa and adapt to its particular conditions. Climate change had to force some of them out of the forests and onto the savanna. The specific selective pressures of savanna life had to favor upright walking, tool use, and increased brain size. All of this had to happen in the right sequence, in the right places, at the right times. Change any one of those variables and humans don't evolve. In our alternative timeline, the first step in that chain doesn't occur. The ecological vacuum never opens. The mammals remain small, nocturnal, marginal. The primates might evolve anyway, tree-dwelling, fruit-eating specialists, but they never come down from the trees. They never face the pressures that would expand their brains and create the feedback loop that led to human consciousness. This is not to say that intelligence couldn't have evolved in our alternative timeline. We discussed the troodontids, those large-brain theropods that might have developed cognitive abilities comparable to crows, or dolphins or chimpanzees. Intelligence of some kind would almost certainly appear somewhere in the dinosaur family tree. It's too useful an adaptation not to evolve when conditions favor it. But intelligence like ours, consciousness that can contemplate its own existence, ask questions about the nature of reality, feel wonder at the vastness of the cosmos, that's something else entirely. Human-level intelligence required not just a big brain, but complex social structures, where communication ability directly impacted reproductive success, manipulative appendages. That made tool use possible a developmental period long enough to transmit complex culture between generations, environmental pressures that rewarded planning, abstract thinking, and cooperation, and crucially, the feedback loop where these factors reinforced each other over millions of years. Every step was contingent. Every step was improbable. Intelligence might have evolved among the dinosaurs of our alternative timeline, but human-like consciousness, the kind that builds cities and writes symphonies, and asks why am I here, might never have emerged. And here's the profound part, the alternative Earth we've been imagining throughout this documentary would not need consciousness to appreciate it. It would not need an observer to give it meaning. It would simply be a planet covered with living things, each one the product of billions of years of evolution, each one perfectly adapted to its niche, each one part of an interconnected web of relationships more complex than any mind could fully comprehend. Ceratopsian herds flowing across grasslands like living rivers, packs of feathered predators hunting with coordination and intelligence, marine reptiles cruising through oceans that have never known a fishing net or an oil spill, pterosaurs soaring on thermals above mountains that have never been climbed, life in all its diversity and struggle and improbable persistence, playing out on a stage that has remained essentially unchanged for 230 million years. We tend to think of consciousness as the point of evolution, the goal toward which life has been striving since the first cell divided in some ancient ocean. That's our bias talking, the natural tendency of any thinking being to assume that thinking is what matters most. Evolution doesn't have a point. It doesn't have a goal. It's simply a process, variation, selection, inheritance, playing out over deep time, producing whatever forms happen to survive and reproduce in whatever conditions happen to exist. Dinosaurs weren't failures because they didn't evolve human-level intelligence. They were spectacular successes because they dominated the planet for 165 million years in our timeline and left descendants birds that still fill the skies today. If they had survived the asteroid, they would have continued to be successes, adapting to whatever challenges the planet threw at them, diversifying into whatever niches became available, living and dying and evolving without ever once wondering why. And maybe there's something to be said for that. For a world that simply exists without the burden of consciousness, without the weight of meaning, without the endless human need to understand and explain and justify. A world where life just lives without asking what it's all for. The asteroid hit, the dinosaurs died, and here you are, 66 million years later, listening to a story about a world that never was. But as you think about all we've explored today, maybe you can imagine it. So what do we take from this journey through 66 million years that never happened? First, contingency. Evolution is not a ladder climbing toward inevitable progress. It's a branching bush where any branch might be cut off at any moment by chance events. An asteroid a few kilometers across, arriving a few minutes earlier or later, striking a few hundred kilometers to one side or the other. Any of these tiny changes in cosmic timing, and the entire history of life on Earth would be different. You wouldn't exist. I wouldn't exist. Mammals might still be small, nocturnal creatures hiding from the dinosaurs that would still rule the planet. Second, the fragility of our own existence. It's humbling to realize that we exist only because of a catastrophe. That every human who has ever lived, every artist, every scientist, every philosopher, every person you've ever loved exists only because a rock from space happened to strike in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. We are not inevitable. We are not destiny. We are staggeringly, improbably, almost impossibly lucky. Third, responsibility. We are the one species in Earth's 4.5 billion year history that can ask what if? We can imagine alternative histories. We can contemplate deep time. we can understand our place in the vast sweep of evolutionary history. And with that understanding comes responsibility. In our timeline, we are currently causing what many scientists call the sixth extinction, a mass extinction event, caused not by asteroids or volcanoes, but by one species, thus habitat destruction, climate change, overhunting, pollution, invasive species. The rate of extinction today is estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate. In the last 500 years, we've driven hundreds of species extinct. Passenger pigeons that once darkened the skies, Steller's sea cows, thylacines, Caribbean monk seals, golden toads, and thousands more that never had common names, never captured public imagination, but were nonetheless irreplaceable products of millions of years of evolution. The dinosaurs didn't choose to go extinct. They didn't have the capacity to understand what was happening or to do anything about it. They were victims of cosmic bad luck. We have a choice. We can choose to be stewards rather than destroyers. We can choose to preserve the remarkable evolutionary heritage that the 0.5 billion years of Earth history has produced. And we have done so in some cases. The California condor brought back from 27 individuals. The black-footed ferret from 18. The Mauritius kestrel from 4. These are proof that extinction is not inevitable, that we can change course when we decide to. Fourth, perspective on deep time. Human civilization is about 10,000 years old. Our species, Homo sapiens, is perhaps 300,000 years old. The genus Homo goes back maybe to 0.5 million years. The dinosaurs ruled for 165 million years. In our alternative timeline, they would have ruled for 230 million years, nearly 100 times longer than the entire human lineage has existed. When we talk about saving the planet, we're not really talking about the planet. Earth will be fine. It survived worse than us. It survived the asteroid that actually did kill the dinosaurs. It survived the Permian extinction, which killed 96% of marine species. Life will continue long after we're gone, evolving into new forms, filling new niches, exploring new possibilities. What we're really trying to save is a planet that is habitable for us, and for the species we share it with. We're trying to preserve the particular configuration of ecosystems and climate that allowed human civilization to develop. And finally, wonder at our own improbability. The fact that you exist, that you can hear these words and contemplate deep time, that you can imagine alternative histories, and feel wonder at the vastness of the universe. All of this is a gift of cosmic proportions. In our alternative timeline, the dinosaurs would rule a beautiful planet, complex and diverse and teeming with life, but there would be no one to call it beautiful, no one to marvel at its complexity, no one to ask questions about where it came from or where it's going. We exist, against all odds, through a chain of contingencies, each of which was improbable. We exist, and we can ask why. That is both a privilege and a responsibility. The asteroid did hit. On that spring morning 66 million years ago, the rock from space didn't miss. It screamed through the atmosphere at 20 kilometers per second and struck the shallow seas, near the Yucatan Peninsula, with the force of 100 million nuclear weapons. The iridium layer we find in rocks around the world is real. The shocked quartz is real. The Chicxulub crater is real, and the extinction was real. Within 1,000 years, 75% of all species on Earth were gone. Every non-avian dinosaur larger than a chicken, every pterosaur, every mosasaur and plesiosaur, countless other species of plants, animals, fungi, microscopic organisms. But extinction is not the end of the story. In the ecological vacuum left by the dinosaurs, the survivors diversified. The mammals, which had spent 150 million years in the shadows, exploded into every available niche. Within 10 million years, there were mammals the size of bears. Within 25 million years, there were whale-sized mammals in the oceans. Within 50 million years, there were ecosystems as complex and diverse as those that existed before the extinction, just filled with completely different species. The planet healed. Evolution continued. Life, as it always does, found a way, and eventually, one lineage of primates in Africa began to do something unprecedented. They began to ask questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do the stars move? Where did we come from? What happened to the creatures whose bones we find in the rocks? That questioning led to science, to paleontology, to the realization that the world was once utterly different from what it is now. That journey from ape to astronomer took about 2.5 million years. A blink of an eye compared to the 230 million years the dinosaurs might have ruled in our alternative timeline. But it was enough. And that brings us to the end of our journey through 66 million years that never happened. We've watched dinosaurs survive the Paleocene, thrive during the Eocene heat, endure the Oligocene cooling, adapt to Miocene grasslands, evolve sophisticated intelligence, survive the Pleistocene ice ages, and ultimately create a modern world utterly alien to our own. We've explored how evolution works, how contingency shapes history, how the same selective pressures produce similar solutions in different lineages. We've asked whether dinosaurs could have evolved, intelligence, whether mammals could have ever broken free of their constraints, what the planet would look like today if that asteroid had missed. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now. Which era of our alternative timeline would you most want to visit? The Eocene hothouse with its tropical poles, the Miocene grasslands with their megaherds, the Pleistocene ice ages with woolly dinosaurs, the modern world where 230 million years of dinosaur evolution has produced wonders we can barely imagine. If you enjoyed this deep dive into alternative history, show it some love, hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this video with more people who are curious about deep time and evolutionary biology. If you're not already subscribed to the Cosmic Atlas, what are you waiting for? We release documentaries like this every week, exploring everything from the origin of life to the fate of the universe, from the smallest particles to the largest structures in existence. Hit that subscribe button right now and click the notification bell, set it to all, so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who loves dinosaurs, someone who's fascinated by alternative history, someone who asks what if about the deep past. These thought experiments are more fun when they spark conversations. And if you want to support the channel and get access to extended content, behind-the-scenes material, and early access to videos, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description. Even a few dollars a month makes a huge difference and allows us to keep making content like this. Coming up next on the Cosmic Atlas, we're exploring more alternative histories. What if the Permian extinction never happened? That event, 252 million years ago, killed 96% of marine species, far worse than the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. What would the world look like if those species had survived? What if humans had evolved 10 million years earlier? Could Homo sapiens level intelligence have emerged in the Miocene? What would human civilization look like with an extra 10 million years of history? What if the asteroid had been twice as large? Could anything have survived a more catastrophic impact? These are the questions we'll be exploring in the coming weeks. Don't miss them. Before we close, one final thought. The dinosaurs never wondered why they existed. They never built monuments or wrote stories or asked questions about the stars. But for 165 million years and for 230 million years in our alternative timeline, they were Earth's dominant life forms, more successful by any objective measure than we've been so far. Their existence didn't require meaning. It didn't require anyone to appreciate it. It just was. And maybe there's a lesson in that for us, the apes who became conscious enough to ask why. Maybe the question isn't what is the meaning of life. Maybe the question is, does life need meaning to be valuable? The dinosaurs would have said no, if they could talk, which they couldn't, because the asteroid hit. Thank you for joining me on this journey through deep time. Thank you for letting your mind wander through worlds that never were, for exercising the unique human capacity to imagine alternatives, to contemplate contingencies. This is the Cosmic Atlas, where we explore the universe, our planet, and the razor-thin thread of chance that connects us to everything that came before. I'll see you in the next video. Keep wondering, keep questioning, keep looking at the stars and asking what if.